All right, let's talk about one of the most incredible financial thrillers of the 21st century. Seriously, this story has everything. We're talking spies, fugitive executives, and billions of euros in cash that just, poof, vanished into thin air. This is the unbelievable story of how one of Europe's biggest and brightest tech companies turned out to be completely and utterly fake.
Okay, so picture this. Our story kicks off right in the middle of the action. It's June 19th, 2020. A private jet is revving its engines on a small airfield in Austria. And on board, one of the most powerful men in global finance, the COO of a company supposedly worth almost $30 billion, a guy named Jan Marsalek.
Marsalek told the pilot he was heading to Manila, and his mission? Just to chase down some missing bank transfer. He was totally cool, totally collected, and he dismissed the whole thing as just a simple clerical error. But this wasn't an error. This was the start of an escape. And this so-called clerical error, it wasn't exactly small change. We are talking about 1.9 billion euros. But here's the twist, the part that makes this whole story just mind-blowing. The money wasn't missing. It wasn't lost in some transfer. It wasn't stolen by hackers. The shocking truth is that the 1.9 billion euros never existed in the first place. So yeah, Jan Marsalek wasn't flying to find the money. He was running. He was running from the German police, from Interpol, and from the smoking wreckage of a truly spectacular lie. To this day, he's still on Interpol's most wanted list, a ghost at the heart of a multi-billion euro illusion.
So how on earth did a company this big fool the entire world for so long? Well, first we'll look at the dream they were selling. Then we're going to meet the hunters who first realized something was fishy. We'll break down the surprisingly simple way they pulled off their massive lie, watch the whole thing come crashing down, and finally figure out the huge lesson we can all learn from this.
Okay, so to really truly get your head around the lie, you first have to understand the dream. You have to understand why so many people wanted to believe in Wirecard and how it became this huge symbol of national pride. You have to remember, back in the early 2000s, Europe, and especially Germany, had a serious case of tech envy. I mean, the US had these world-changing companies like PayPal, Google, and Amazon. Germany's economy? Still run by old, stuffy, traditional banks. And then along comes Wirecard, positioned as the great hope, Germany's answer to Silicon Valley, the fintech giant that was going to lead Europe into the digital age. Now, its beginnings were, let's say, a little bit shady. Wirecard actually got its start processing payments for the murky corners of the internet. Yep, porn and gambling sites. But under a new CEO, a guy named Markus Braun, the company totally reinvented itself. It grew like crazy, and then came this huge symbolic moment in 2018. It got so valuable, it actually kicked the 150-year-old commerce bank right out of Germany's top stock index, the DAX 30. The old guard was out, tech was officially in. And at the center of this whole dream was Markus Braun. He built this very specific persona, right? He even adopted the black turtleneck, the classic Steve Jobs uniform, and became this tech guru. He'd get on stage and talk in these complex visionary riddles about the digitization of money, basically promising a future where Wirecard processed every single transaction on the planet. And you know what? The numbers always seem to back him up. Every single quarter, revenue went up, profits went up, and the stock price? It was just a rocket ship. Investors were completely hooked. To question Wirecard felt like you weren't just questioning a stock, it felt like you were questioning Germany's entire future in tech. But behind the soaring stock price and all those visionary presentations, something just wasn't adding up. And a few people, they started to notice. So let's meet the hunters, the first people who suspected that something was deeply wrong here.
Okay, so let's talk about short sellers. In the world of finance, these guys are often painted as the villains, right? The hyenas of the market. They basically sniff out sick or fraudulent companies, bet their stock will fall, and make money when it collapses. Yeah, most people don't like them, but sometimes the hyena is the only one who can smell that something has gone rotten.
So in 2015, the first real whiff of trouble appeared. This mysterious dossier called the Zatara Report started making the rounds in London, and it was explosive. It made direct claims of fraud, and it said Wirecard's revenues were completely made up. This report landed on the desk of a journalist at the Financial Times named Dan McCrum.
So McCrum starts digging. He flies all the way to Asia to check out these companies Wirecard was supposedly buying for hundreds of millions of dollars. And what he finds is just, wow. These valuable acquisitions were often just empty offices with a bus stop outside. So he publishes his findings, thinking, okay, now the German authorities will launch a huge investigation into Wirecard. But instead, the unthinkable happens. A criminal investigation was launched against him. And this is the point in the story where it stops being a financial drama and turns into a full-on spy novel. Seriously, Wirecard didn't respond like a normal company. They responded like a cartel. They hired private investigators to tail down McCrum and other journalists. They allegedly tried to bug their offices, hired hackers to steal emails. Their public message was simple and brutal. These journalists are criminals, working with evil short sellers to bring down our great German company.
And here's the part that is just, honestly, terrifying. The German financial regulator, an agency called BaFin, they believed them. In a move that absolutely floored the financial world, BaFin actually filed a criminal complaint against the journalists and even banned people from short-selling Wirecard stock. I mean, think about that for a second. The official regulators were prosecuting the people telling the truth, while the actual criminals were being protected as national heroes. It's insane.
So this just begs the question, right? How did they actually do it? How do you hide a 1.9 billion euro hole on your books for a decade, right under the noses of the world's top auditors? Well, the mechanics of the lie were, looking back, shockingly simple.
It all centered on this kind of boring-sounding business concept called third-party acquiring, or TPA. The story went like this. Wirecard claimed a huge part of its business came from countries in Asia where it didn't have a license. So they'd say, no problem. We just use a local partner, they process the payments for us, they take a small fee, and then they hold our profits in an account for us. It sounded totally legitimate, even pretty clever.
But it was all just smoke and mirrors, built in 4 pretty easy steps. Step 1, they just made up these third-party partners. They didn't exist. They were ghosts. Step 2, they reported massive, fake profits coming from these ghost partners. Step 3, and this is the key, they claimed the cash wasn't in their German bank accounts. Oh no, that would be way too easy to check. They said the 1.9 billion was sitting in special escrow accounts at 2 banks in the Philippines. And step 4, to prove it all, they just forged confirmation letters from those banks. So when the auditors from the big, prestigious firm Ernst & Young would come around and ask, hey, can we see proof of this cash? Wirecard would just hand them a piece of paper, a forged letter with a stamp on it. And for 10 straight years, the auditors looked at that piece of paper and basically just said, okay, looks good. Nobody for 8 decades thought to do the one simple thing that would have blown the whole fraud wide open. Pick up the phone and call the banks in the Philippines themselves.
For a decade, this incredible house of cards stood strong. But by June of 2020, the constant pressure from the Financial Times and just a growing nervousness of investors brought the whole thing to a very dramatic and very sudden endgame.
And the collapse, when it came, happened with breathtaking speed. First, Wirecard delayed its annual report. Then they delayed it again. Finally, the auditors at EY, under a ton of pressure, did what they should have done 10 years earlier. They contacted the Philippine banks directly. And the bank's response was immediate and devastating. They said, we have no idea who you are. Wirecard has no accounts here. On June 18th, Wirecard was forced to admit the money probably didn't exist. The very next day, Jan Marsalek was on that jet. And a few days after that, CEO Marcus Braun was arrested.
The aftermath was just brutal. The stock dropped 60% in minutes, then 80%, then 99%. Billions and billions of dollars in pension funds and regular people's savings, it all just evaporated almost overnight. A nearly $30 billion company was wiped off the map in a little over a week. You know, the story of Wirecard isn't just some crazy accounting fraud story. It's actually a profound story about human psychology. And it holds this huge lesson for all of us about why so many smart, experienced people were so totally fooled for so long. It really boils down to this powerful little quirk in our brains called confirmation bias. The German regulators, the global investors, the auditors, all of them wanted the story of the great German tech giant to be true. It fit their worldview. It confirmed their belief that Europe could compete with Silicon Valley. And because they wanted to believe it so badly, they just subconsciously ignored the giant mountain of red flags staring them right in the face. So what can we all take away from this? Well, there are some pretty clear warning signs. First, complexity is often just a mask for fraud. If a company can't explain how it makes money in a simple sentence, you should be very careful. Second, if a company's profits are all supposedly sitting in some hard-to-reach overseas accounts that you can't directly check, be careful. And finally, and this might be the most important one, if a CEO spends more time viciously attacking their critics than just answering legitimate questions, run.
In the end, that 1.9 billion euros was a ghost. It was an illusion conjured up on a spreadsheet. But the devastation it caused to real people, to their pensions and their life savings, that was very, very real. And it leaves us with this huge question. Now that we've all seen how the trick was done, how do we make sure we don't fall for the next great financial magic act?